Released in 2019, Canada's Changing Climate Report focuses on how Canada's climate has changed, what has caused it, and the changes we can expect in the future. The report brings together research from Environment and Climate Change Canada, Fisheries and Oceans Canada, and Natural Resources Canada, along with university experts, to provide a science-based foundation for addressing the impacts of climate change and how to adapt to reduce risk. We're taking the deep dive into climate change, climate resilience, and emergency response on this episode of AE Live.
Coming to you on the internet audio, all the STEM homies know ways where you gotta go vibing your ride to the Graham and Michael groove. Well, it's a whole new freaky flow interview. Treat your ears, get the gist of careers from a list of our engineers and scientists, maybe twisted up with technologists. The podcast, baby, and not to be missed. Got more fly than a ripe banana. Like Sam, I got the stamina streaming across Canada. I can treat sugar band, I got that swiggity swag, yeah, and the 411 from my horse to Niagara. Don't you know we're gonna innovate? Got a topic here to elevate. Gonna entertain and educate.
I'm Michael Tolboom, Associated Engineering's creative leader, coming to you from Calgary, Alberta, on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Siksika, Kainai, and Piikani, the Tsuut'ina, the Îyârhe Nakoda Nations, the Otipemisiwak Métis government of the Métis Nation within Alberta District 6, and all people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of southern Alberta. Global temperatures are rising, and warming in Canada has been and is expected to be twice the magnitude of global averages. Best estimates put Canada's annual average temperature change at 1.7 degrees Celsius since 1946, with the most severe changes measured in northern Canada, and the climate will continue to warm. Projections estimate that regardless of what efforts we make to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, warming will follow a similar trend for at least the next 2 decades. To bring that back to our focus on engineering in Canada, the climate impacts we've seen due to increased climate extremes will continue, and we need to continue to mitigate the impacts on our infrastructure and build resiliency into our communities. What changes have we seen, and how will it impact us? Well, precipitation has increased across much of Canada with a trend towards less snow and more rain. However, summer rainfall in parts of southern Canada is less. Worryingly, it's not necessarily more days of rain, but more extreme rainfall periods, increasing the frequency of flooding. We're also experiencing changing temperature extremes, which for many is most noticeable as increasingly severe heat waves over the summer and increased drought and wildfire. Importantly, temperature extremes that used to be rare, such as once every 20 years, are becoming more frequent and could occur once every 5 years or every second year in some projections. The Canadian North is very familiar with changing snow and ice conditions, as many communities are grappling with the challenges of maintaining transportation networks that once relied on roads over permafrost or across frozen lakes. To talk more about climate change and the challenges of planning and designing for future climate conditions, I'm joined by Twyla Kowalczyk. Twyla is Associated's Manager, Strategic Advisory Services, and Discipline Lead, Climate Resilience. Thanks for joining me today, Twyla, and welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So, Twyla, you have a civil engineering degree and a master's degree in water resources engineering from the University of Alberta. Now, almost 20 years into your career, you're a climate resilience specialist. Walk me through some of the key moments in your life that led you here.
So my background is really, or at the start of my career, was in river engineering. So did a lot of work around river flooding and erosion protection, some sediment treatment and systems. So when I worked at the City of Calgary, my role was actually with the river engineering team, and I had overhauled the response plan for river flooding. And in 2013, Calgary had a large river flood, about 100-year sized event, and I played a pivotal role in terms of the response of that event. And so my career is quite unique in that I've gone through the preparedness side of building the response plans and putting measures in place for this type of big event. And then I lived through actually responding and recovery from that side of an event. And from there, my career started to morph into the policy side. So beyond the engineering and a lot of the communication side. And when I worked for the Calgary Water Utility, then I was asked to take on climate adaptation. So I've been working on the flooding side and then starting to look at what does it mean for drought or extreme rainfall or extreme heat, or what are those other hazards that we need to look at. So I came to climate through a river flooding side, which is one of the many hazards that we'll see from climate change. And then from there, I've continued to work on national standards or work with other project teams, trying to look at how do we actually integrate climate planning into our designs and the work that we do.
Yeah, I remember the Calgary event and all the dramatic photos that were coming out of that. So hearing that you worked on that project, I got to ask you, was there any sense that you were kind of racing against the clock to get measures in place?
Yeah, time is definitely of the essence. The biggest challenge is forecasting how big these events are going to be. So in the City of Calgary, when I was there, we were part of a monitoring team. So we were looking at snowpack levels and rain projections. From mid-May to mid-July, we have a team that were looking at things around the clock, and we work closely with the provincial flood forecasters. But with Calgary being so close to the mountains, it's even more difficult to forecast how those events are going to be.
Yeah, no lead time, right?
So it was about maybe a week before the event that some of the rain forecasts coming in, the range was massive. It could be small or big, so it's pretty far out to understand that. But then as we're kind of getting closer to that time, we're now maybe 4 or 5 days out, then we actually start to drain the reservoirs and lower the levels just in case that event does come. So there were certain measures a few days before, but it's really, you don't really know until the rain starts to fall. So in Calgary, there's 2 rivers. There's the Elbow River and the Bow River. The Elbow River, we have about 8 to 9 hours from the time that we see the rainfall in the mountains to when it actually comes into the city and into the city's reservoir in Glenmore. And then the Bow River, we have maybe about 3 days before the peak comes into the city. So in the Elbow, once we see what that forecast is, even a day or so before, what actually fell on the Elbow River was actually a 500-year event. The peak of that hit right at the top of that mountain range. So that river system itself got a 500-year event. We were able to draw down the reservoir in advance. So about a day and a half before, we're starting to draw down that reservoir. But the time to direct people to build flood protection walls, put up temporary barriers like sandbags and water tubes, there was a lot of prioritization on the fly in terms of what we can get done in time and how to readjust things. So time is really of the essence, and that's different from based on where you live and which river system. But yeah, there was a lot of complex decisions made on the fly, a lot of maps of who to evacuate and where to build barriers and how big they had to be. That was all prepared ahead of time for various different size floods. But during the actual event, you still had to make calls on the fly to prioritize resources and direct people. So, yeah,
so
it was intense.
When an event like that happens, like the 1 in 500-year events, in weeks and months and years after that, does that affect what people consider a 1 in 100-year or 1 in 500-year event?
Absolutely. So once you have these big events, the statistics we use to actually come up with those return period events, that gets redone. So after the 2013 event, the hydrology of the river system is reassessed. And so now what we would say was 100-year on the Bow River at that time is now considered around a 70-year event. And so as we get these bigger events, we can see what that potential is. The other thing that will influence that on the topic of climate change will be more intense rainfall and bigger rainfall. So the hotter the atmosphere gets, the more water vapor it can hold, and it can hold it for longer. And so when we see these events, they're going to become more intense and more frequent. So more rain is going to be able to fall. So what we consider a 100-year event now is going to be much bigger in the future. We're going to see much bigger events. Planning for, a lot of our infrastructure design in Alberta for flooding, the standard from the province is a 100-year flood. In BC, they use a 200-year standard. There's different standards across the country. But from a climate change point of view, we need to be designing for a much bigger size event.
Maybe getting back to you more personally, was there a moment when you realized that climate change would be the focus of your career, or did you kind of fall into that accidentally?
I guess kind of fell into it accidentally in a way. So after the flood event, we had the city had called in a number of experts from across the country, and we had this expert panel to help provide some insight and guidance to help us build a roadmap for the City of Calgary. And I can remember there were 5 or 6 kind of focus areas of where they would work. And one of them was climate change. And so a lot of the work in the recovery phase is really intense. You have about 18 months where there's high interest to get a lot of things done. So there's a lot of focus on erosion protection and debris cleanup and getting some flood protection done. As we kind of work through those key pillars, climate change became one of the latter ones that once kind of the main recovery was done, they moved into that phase. And so that was about 2016, I think. I have to think back. That's about when I was asked to move over and start to take on that climate change role. So it wasn't necessarily something that I had intentionally gone into. I kind of moved into that realm, which made sense from the flooding side. But then as I got involved in climate change and thinking about it from the flood side, it's much bigger than that. So starting to look at all these different types of hazards, starting to work. I worked across the city, across different business units. So I've become a lot more generalist. I know a lot about flooding, and then otherwise I know a little bit about a lot. And really it's about connecting people and asking the right questions to help them figure out what are those future conditions they need to fight for.
I think that's really crucial, right? Because you need somebody that's got that holistic view to tie all the pieces together. And we see how the flood event affects so many different things, right? Like transit systems and nuclear planning.
But I think another benefit that I have in this space is that I've gone from starting a career in engineering design and then moving really into the emergency management side. I've also done some policy work. I've done a lot of public communication work. I've worked a lot with council directly. And so as my career has evolved, I've got that engineering foundation of the work that I do, but I've been exposed to a lot of these other disciplines. And also I was at the city, in the water resources side at the water utility, but I was often bridging with the parks department and the emergency management department and transit. And so through my career, I've become very much of a bridge across disciplines. And so as I'm working more and more in this climate space, I'm seeing the value of being able to connect these things because they're all systems. They all work together. And so even bringing your operations, understanding the real value of involving operations in the conversations along with designers, that's where I see for the building resilience and what we do.
So we talked a little bit about what happened in Calgary and I guess the fallout from that. Do you look at the way that municipalities are dealing with climate change right now and worry? What do you think happens if we do nothing? Or if we stay on the path we're on right now? Are we on a good path?
So I'd say, what are we at, 2024? So it's been 8 years in this space. I'd say the tone is very different. The conversations that I have now don't feel as difficult around climate change as even 5 years ago. So I'd say, especially in Alberta, it's taking time for that to move in the climate risk space. But I am seeing movement. So I'm seeing quite a few municipalities that they are planning for extreme heat and flooding and other pieces like that. I think the piece that's lagging or will take some time is getting to a point where we're actually designing our infrastructure for that future condition. I think right now there's more focus on the response side, the emergency response side. There are plans being built that are, part of it is climate change is so big. It affects so many things, which could be overwhelming. So a lot of communities that are planning to do risk assessments to narrow that focus so they can kind of target their first steps. And then since there's a lot of work in the planning, I'm not seeing a lot of it yet into a lot of the design, but I am starting to see that change. So you are starting to see a lot of climates that are expecting, how are you incorporating climate in your design? There are certain provinces like BC that do require it, climate to be part of it. So we are seeing this movement, and I think that in the next 5 years is what is going to be really different. When I look 5 years back, it was still how do you enter into this conversation with certain clients? I think that has shifted. It's still a difficult conversation because right now it comes down to funds. People are tight on funds. There are a lot of competing things, and the challenge for us as engineers is how do we design our projects to be resilient to future conditions? And part of that is how do we actually add even more benefit to our projects and how do we think about those measures early on? A lot of those things don't actually have to be big cost pieces. But if you think about that at the project conception stage, we can actually incorporate quite a bit of resilience into it. So I think that's what's shifting, is you are starting to see people get it into that project level. And up to now, there's been pockets of people that are progressive and moving forward. But by and large, I think communities are getting into more of the design side, whereas before it's been more of a response side as well.
So for a non-engineer like myself, can you give me some, I guess, pretty simple examples of what that planning or that design change looks like? Like, is it making your roofs heavier to allow for more snow, or is it making your stormwater pipes bigger to allow for bigger rain events?
Exactly. You got it. So big one that I'll connect on first would be, and we'll continue on the rain side of it. So more intense rainfall, your drainage system, so your storm side, your pipes, your culverts, or your overland drainage is planning for that future rainfall. So you have intensity, duration, frequency curves, IDF curves, that use those statistics of all those different events to forecast what 100 years is going to be, for example. There are future climate-informed IDF curves available now that the federal government have prepared. I can get that on Climate Data Portal. You can use those IDF curves to design your stormwater system. So the other thing I find in a project is looking at the site a little more holistically. So when you're designing something, maybe you're fixing some drainage in a community or a park area, these are great opportunities if you're going in to do some construction work, is to think through things like, is there a public use space in this area? If so, do we need to plan for extreme heat? So if people are out using these public spaces, can we start to plant trees strategically in places where we want shade for people? Right? We want trees on the south side so that it's creating shade onto the park bench.
Yeah.
Also landscaping and projects. We need to evolve that to be actually draining your runoff to those sites, to water those sites. We need drought resistant plants. Anything with a buildings actually are hit with probably the most number of climate hazards. So anytime there's a building, there's a lot of things that you can do. So for sure, if there's people inside, ventilation systems, so HVAC systems to deal with wildfire smoke, also increased heat, so ventilation. But then also looking at using light-colored materials. Your roof could either be a green roof or it could be solar panels. Again, the passive piece of where you plant your trees in your landscaping, put it on the south side of the building so it's creating that shade. So there's a lot of things that if you think about it early in the project, you're already going to be doing landscaping, for example. You can think about that right from the beginning, about being intentional about creating benefit from that beyond just an aesthetic, right? Thinking up front around light-colored materials. Right now the style is a lot of dark materials, but that lighter colored material will reflect heat, right? So there's a lot of things that we can do kind of early on, if that helps.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things there, but there's a quick, but the key thing is, especially for the rainfall and culverts or bridge crossings or things like that, is how long is the life of that asset going to be in place? And you need to be designing for the conditions at the end of the life of that asset.
If a municipal client comes to you and asks for these kinds of improvements, they've already got a lot of stuff buried in the ground. They've already got buildings that have been built.
Yep.
I can see how that would be tempting to throw the money at the emergency management, right? Because you're like, well, we can't afford to dig out Main Street. So we're just going to accept that this event happens and deal with it as best we can after the fact. I think that's
absolutely
how we approach it.
There's going to be a mix, right? In some situations, a retrofit of a piece of asset might make sense. And in others, it may not make sense to upgrade something until the end of its life. And so we've done some work for City of Calgary facilities where we've looked at their asset management planning and their capital plans for their facilities. And we've started to integrate what are the impacts of climate change. And we've looked at that return on investment of different types of actions we could take. And I won't get into too much detail, but that piece that you're getting to is there are times where it makes sense to do a retrofit. And there are times that it makes sense to wait. And when that asset is ready to be replaced, you do it at that point. So we're not saying for climate, we're going to go and take out all these assets and put new and replace. That's not realistic. But when that opportunity arises and that you're doing an upgrade, that's a great time to go in and really, is there something that you can do to increase the benefit of what you're doing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just raising that awareness.
Absolutely.
That this is going to be an issue. We talk a lot today about managing climate change and bringing that to our clients. There is a mandate here that climate change is a part of every project we undertake. Are you seeing that same commitments in infrastructure projects everywhere in Canada? Or are there still municipalities trying to manage costs just by avoiding climate change mitigation and adaptation in their projects?
I'd say in my experience, what I see is it's a mix. It's still a mix. Not everybody, not all clients. Also, some clients at a higher level or certain pockets may be ready and prepared to talk about climate change, but other ones may not. So I see there is some variability in terms of the individual person, the project manager on the client side, and their comfort level with climate. That can influence a project. But I am seeing it starting to shift where more and more clients are having that conversation up front and are asking. I'm seeing it being asked in RFPs. You're seeing that increasing. So it's not consistent across the board, but it's definitely more prominent in the conversation than it used to be. I see a mix of climate mitigation, so reducing greenhouse gases, and climate adaptation, which is managing the risks. I have to check often if when someone will mention a climate change plan, it's not always clear if they're talking about energy side, the mitigation side, or adaptation. So terminology is something that's also evolving. A number of communities may have had climate mitigation plans first. So the GHG reduction is maybe the first focus, and adaptation is something that they're now having to. And so these tend to be being developed initially kind of separately. But a big part of what we're trying to do is bring those conversations together and have, as we're bringing forward climate adaptation and risk reduction measures, we're also looking for those GHG reduction measures on projects. They're trying to bring those two together. So it's definitely increasing, but it's not consistent.
I feel like here in Alberta, at least, we have this reputation of being really locked into that oil and gas mindset, and climate change isn't real. But at the same time, we've seen so many things in the province, like, the flooding in Calgary, the fires in Slave Lake and Fort McMurray. Edmonton, I think, had 200 hours under air breathing quality warning last year. So it's like we keep getting hit with these, what I think are climate related.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, sir. And so that's the connection that I think is becoming very real for people, right? It's affecting our day-to-day life. My summer holidays, I shift them earlier and try to avoid the smoke. I also try to avoid the heat in August. I'm not a heat person. So people's behaviors are shifting because we're experiencing these triggers. But I would also say in Alberta, we are definitely influenced by oil and gas and the provincial regulations. At the same time, that's not stopping what municipalities are doing in the space, because they are at the front end of this. Right, they are responsible for citizens and the services that they provide. And we're seeing that these events are affecting that. And so when it comes down to preparing for heat with smoke and flood and drought, those things are happening regardless of what's happening at higher levels of government. So you're definitely seeing municipalities are making that step.
Yeah, they're hearing a lot from their constituents.
Absolutely. And so, and another big thing on the Alberta side as well is, across the country, when everyone is tight for funds. So when those funds come available, that's where you're seeing that movement, right? And last year, for example, in Alberta, there was some funding that was directed through the province that helped kickstart climate adaptation plans and risk assessments. And last year, I think I can't remember the number. I think it's around 15 different communities that we were able to help support last year on climate risk assessments and action plans and get them going. And so those funding pieces are key. And so staying on top of when those funds come out, how do we help our clients get in there and get that? So same at the federal side, any federal funding right now that you want to get for projects, you have to do a climate risk assessment as part of that project. And so we have teams of people and systems ready to go that we can jump in and do that kind of work on those projects. You're also seeing federally a lot of talk around nature-based solutions, natural asset management. They want to see those green solutions first, and then what can you do with gray? They have to work together. But seeing the funding that's coming out from the federal side helps to give us a guide of how can we help our clients actually access that funding. It comes down to how do we approach our projects.
That leads nicely into my next question, which might be a bit of a trick question. Is there anything that you're seeing that you think the average person isn't really aware of on the climate front, like things that people should be worried about or excited about?
Excited about, worried about?
Threats or opportunities?
I think one thing that people are really becoming aware of is that the personal health risk is, I think, changing the story a bit. So when you're talking about smoke and heat, I think that's where it's making it real for people individually. So I think that's what's one of the things that are starting to wake things up in terms of people paying attention to climate change, because, if you live in a flood zone, that you're more, might be more top of mind. But right now, everybody is feeling the heat and the smoke. So I think that's really changing people's attention to the importance of planning for climate change. I think another thing that's really important for people to realize is that doing nothing on climate change will actually cost us more. It will cost us money. So doing nothing isn't free. There has been different economic analysis done that actually shows how those costs are going to increase over time. And that's in all of community cost. It affects all of us through insurance, through medical appointments, through a number of different things and how we invest our money. So what we can be doing now to be proactive is actually going to reduce the cost in the long run. So that perception of if we do nothing and kind of ignore that, it's not costing us anything, that's actually not the case. It costs us quite a bit.
Yeah.
Optimistic wise, I think I'm really encouraged by a lot of the youth. My kids are high school students and they are really vocal and motivated about this. I think our young professionals are very much aware. They're very eager and want to be able to integrate sustainability and resilience into their work. So I think we have a really strong workforce of youth that we need to harness to really help encourage this to move forward. I'm really encouraged by that. I think a lot of university programs as well are integrating climate into their work. They're integrating Indigenous ways of knowing into their programs, this reconnection back to nature. I think a lot of these things around climate resilience, they actually make our lives better, right? We're talking about things where we want to integrate more nature. We want to be healthier. We want to have homes that are more insulated. Well, that feels better. And a lot of these things that we're talking about actually make our standard of life better. So, yeah. So I'm optimistic because when I started this 10 years ago or so, there was a lot of really difficult conversations I was having. And now I am searched out by a lot of people that are really keen that want to work in this space and want to know how to get more involved and how to help influence more uptake in their projects. So I find that really encouraging.
I was going to wrap up the interview by asking you what you think we were getting right. And I think that's a great answer. We've got the next generation looking at these problems in a way that maybe our generation didn't.
I think so. And I think, I had one junior individual working with me and I was having a rough day because sometimes it is hard to work in this space. There can be some rough days, as there can be in anything. And I had a fairly younger professional come to me. I was like, I should just be a barista and open a coffee shop. I was having one of those moments, right? And he said, absolutely not. It's like, we are looking to you. If you can't do this, who's going to do this? We need you to fight this fight and we need you to be that person. And I kind of stopped. I was like, oh, okay. But I reflected on that. And yes, I'm really encouraged by the youth that are really motivated by this. But it also really means that we have to be at more senior levels, assertive and supportive, but we need to continue to push to bring this forward. And we need to build up other professions and other people that are in this space. We need to have each other's backs when we're having these conversations. The psychology and the communication side of this, is really, to me, is really interesting. And I think how we navigate these conversations with people is really important. So either from an engineering point of view, this isn't, just a technical engineering problem. This is something that we have to really work with people and in a really empathetic and sympathetic manner to make it work. And I'm just seeing a lot of that empathy and that openness to these conversations in a lot of people that are ready to have that conversation. So I'm really keen. So, and sometimes it felt like a bit of a lone wolf in the room sometimes, but that's definitely not the case anymore. There's a lot of people that are really passionate about this and realize that it's not an all or nothing solution, right? There's really practical things we can do to integrate as much as we can. But, let's be realistic as well. So I think that balanced approach is what I see in a lot of our staff here, which is really encouraging.
Awesome. Can you give me either your favorite cocktail recipe or tips on being a working mom or a true crime athlete?
Oh man, those are really hard questions.
That's what brings in the listeners,
Oh man. Well, I'm really big into old fashioned. I've been playing with the different bitters. I don't know if I have a secret recipe yet, but playing with different bitters is really fun. But what was the question about family and kids? Being a working parent?
Yeah.
Laugh a lot and always be silly. So my kids, they actually can tell when I'm really bogged down with work. Their comment is like, we haven't danced in the kitchen in a while. And so they remind me to, be silly and dance in the kitchen. And then I actually do the same for them as well. Just when they're getting stressed and I'm like, we haven't danced in the kitchen in a while.
That's awesome. Now,
so have fun.
I wish I was doing a vlog now.
I don't think you want to see the kid laugh. Apparently, I always have one hand up, and I'm like, that's like the 90s concert, right? You have one hand up in the front, but you need some good dance moves for the kids to laugh at.
Okay.
Yeah.
But that's an awesome tip. Thanks, Ken.
All right. Thanks, Michael.
That was Twyla Kowalczyk, Associated's Manager, Strategic Advisory Services, and Discipline Lead, Climate Resilience. She joined us to talk about climate change and her experience with extreme weather events. My name is Graham Nix. Your host for this episode was Michael Tolboom, and we'd like to thank you for joining us on this episode of AE Live. Until next time.
Coming to you on the internet audio, all the STEM homies know ways where you gotta go vibing your ride to the Graham and Michael groove. Whoa, it's a whole new funky flow interview. Treat your ears, get the gist of careers from the list of our engineers and scientists, maybe twisted up with technologists. The podcast, baby, and not to be missed. Got more fly than a ripe banana. Like Sam, I got the stamina streaming across Canada. I can trade sugar band, I got that swiggity swag, yeah, and the 411 from my horse to Niagara. Don't you know we're gonna innovate? Got a topic here to elevate. Gonna entertain and educate.